seek a world in which every African man, woman, and child can live in true freedom and equality with their rights respected, upheld, and advanced. We know that such a world is within our reach if we focus on the prevention of all forms of violence against women and children and girls. We cannot realize a society free of violence against women and girls without critically interrogating what one could call the assumptions around patriarchy, around male chauvinism and sexism.
South Africa is a country battling myriad social challenges, and breaking the cycle of abuse takes center stage during this year's 16 Days of Activism campaign against the abuse of women and children. With many calls to action urging us to confront the consequences of violence and abuse, tonight we ask, are we doing enough? Good evening and welcome to Unfiltered. I'm Sizwe Mpofu Walsh. To kick off tonight's discussion, we are joined by Advocate Joyce Maluleke, who is the Director General at the Department of Women, Youth and Persons with Disabilities. Advocate Maluleke, thank you very much for joining us this evening. And could I begin by asking whether you think the 16 Days of No Violence Against Women and Children campaign is still an effective campaign to stem the tide of the crisis of violence against women in South Africa and children?
Good evening, Sizwe. Yes, I believe it is. Because the 16 days is not just about the criminal justice system or about government. It's about the whole society. The whole society must be reminded that all of us have a responsibility to do some action. That's why it's 16 days of activism. Everyone has a responsibility to do something to ensure that we end gender-based violence. The focus all along has been on the criminal justice system. The criminal justice system cannot end gender-based violence because it has already happened. What's important is prevention. And prevention is the whole society, from home, from family to family, neighbor to neighbor, local municipality, community. Everyone has a responsibility to end gender-based violence. So 16 days, it's not the time where we act, but it's the time where we say, let's come together, let's review, let's highlight the challenges and what we've achieved and celebrate what we have achieved and go back to the drawing board to say, how do we address if we think we're not moving? It is very relevant.
When one looks at the triple crises of femicide on the one hand, sexual crime on the other hand, and domestic abuse on the other, what victories do you think we have scored? Because we see that many of the indicators over the last year have actually demonstrated an increase in these scourges on our society.
You are correct. And hence we say the society must play a role. The family must play a role. We cannot end gender-based violence if we don't prevent it. And the families are responsible for preventing. Your neighbors are responsible for preventing. Everyone in society is responsible for preventing gender-based violence. That's what we are trying to encourage everyone to do. Prevention.
Indeed, one of the criticisms leveled against your department is that the activities have been largely symbolic around conferences, around these kinds of campaigns, whereas the concrete steps which would change the direction of people's lives, of course, you can't do everything as government, has been lacking. We haven't made progress on these issues. How do you respond to that criticism of the department?
As someone who's not involved, as someone who doesn't know, the Department of Women, Youth and Persons with Disabilities is coordinating the implementation of the National Strategic Plan on Gender-Based Violence, which has got 6 pillars. And in those 6 pillars, different sectors are responsible to partner with government to work together. So there's a collective, there's an End Gender-Based Violence collective. This collective has got civil society, has got private sector, has got the labor movement, where people are working in their communities in order to address gender-based violence. So it's somebody who doesn't know, and we would invite that person to join the End Gender-Based Violence collective so that they can see that there is work done in different places. There's also something called the 100 Days Challenge. The 100 Days Challenge is communities themselves and labor, even the courts who have joined the 100 Days Challenge, where you set yourself a target of 100 days. If in your community there's violence, or there's an area that has trees or whatever, the communities give themselves 100 days in order to address the problem, either cut trees or ensure that there are lights and all those things. In courts, some of them, they give them 100 days to reduce the case backlog, whether in maintenance or in domestic violence and all those. So we are convening those meetings. We are the ones who are coordinating so that other people can play a role. Our department is a very small department. We are not in the criminal justice system per se, but we are using our power to convene and to coordinate. So that person is ill-informed.
And of course, the convening role is crucial. And in 2018, that summit gave rise to this new plan, which has been the center of government's approach to the question of gender-based violence and femicide. What do you think have been the tangible victories of the strategy, as you say, that has 6 pillars, and what can we hold on to in terms of what has been achieved?
For example, it is from the steering committee that was established then in 2019 that led to the amendment of the legislation that has been amended, the Domestic Violence Act, the Sexual Offences Amendment Act, the Criminal Law Amendment Act, and the Sexual Offences Act, the Recognition of Customary Marriages Act. But not only that, more sexual offences courts, the Specialized Sexual Offences Court, have been established in the criminal justice system. Also, the police have reduced the case backlog. It's because of the team that is working together. There's the IMC that has been established that is also looking at how do we make sure that the criminal justice system improves. But as I said, that's the wrong focus, to focus on the criminal justice system. All of us need to look at what role have you played in order to address gender-based violence or to end gender-based violence. Gender-based violence will not end as long as we're looking at the criminal justice system, because it comes after violence has happened. Prevention, all of us have a role to play in order to make sure that violence doesn't happen.
Absolutely, and of course those amendments to various acts have been important. I think they came through in 2021, and there was a raft of legislative changes which were welcome. Of course, there's a bill before Parliament, I believe, at the moment, which is the creation of the National Council on Gender-Based Violence and Femicide. Do we need another government body with its own board? And are you certain that this body will be an effective tool in government's fight and society's fight against gender-based violence and femicide?
Caesar, earlier on you referred to 2018, where civil society mobilized and whatever. It's the civil society that wanted this structure. They believe that this structure will facilitate the cooperation between government and civil society, but also it will facilitate civil society reporting, because as it is now, most civil society, they receive funding, whether it be from government or private sector, whatever, but they don't account anywhere. And they indicate that they work with victims and whatever. So if all of us work with victims, or our role is to prevent gender-based violence, we need to work together so that we can bring the resources together so that we can be able to move further.
Absolutely, and Advocate Maluleke, you're an advocate, you understand the importance of the law in South African society. Do you think that government's coordination efforts are where they need to be, both in terms of social development on the one hand, which deals with much of the fallout of questions of domestic abuse, the Department of Women, Children and Persons with Disability on the other hand, and of course the criminal justice system? Do you feel that there's the appropriate coordination between government bodies so that the full state is behind this crucial imperative?
Yes, I think there is, as you've already indicated, that the Department of Social Development has got its own role. Also, one of the important things that it provides to victims of gender-based violence or any kind of violence is psychosocial support, but also it provides services at the TCCs, the Tutuzela Care Centers, which are managed by the National Prosecution Authority. So the criminal justice system and the relevant departments that are within the criminal justice system work together. My department is not within the criminal justice system, as I said even before, but we coordinate, we bring all departments together to come and talk and plan together, and we write reports. We submit quarterly reports to the president in terms of implementation of the National Strategic Plan on Gender-Based Violence, which has which listed the responsibilities of all government departments. The role of my department is to ensure that all government mainstreams women, youth, and persons with disabilities in all programs, including the criminal justice system, the police, justice, prosecution, and the correctional services, and everyone, and all other government departments. So there is proper coordination, and we're not stepping on each other's toes. Everyone is playing their role. We have done that, and we're doing that.
And Advocate Maluleke, where to from here? What is the next stage in your set of priorities as the department, especially around the question of gender-based violence and femicide?
Two things. One, as you are aware that the National Assembly approved the National Council on Gender-Based Violence. It's going to serve at the NCOP, and then it will be passed to the president for the president to approve it. Yeah. So the National Council on Gender-Based Violence will play the role of coordinating between civil society and government. That's a separate role. As a department, Cabinet has approved that we implement, we call it call to action to address gender-based violence. We will be going to communities. All municipalities will be working with all municipalities, because we're trying to push what I've been talking about, that all of us have a role to prevent gender-based violence. So we will be working with communities, we'll be working with all sectors, we'll be working with labor, private sector, SALGA, COCTA, everyone has to do something in order to end gender-based violence. That's the only way we can end gender-based violence. If everyone takes responsibility, if you say in your house, not in my house, there's not going to be gender-based violence, and every member of the community also saying the same thing, but also the community saying, not in our community. That's what we're trying to do. If we do that, there won't be gender-based violence. As long as we're looking at the criminal justice system, we'll always have gender-based violence and complain about the case backlogs and all those. So our aim is to prevent gender-based violence.
I believe we have some commentary on social media also coming through about our conversation, and I'll endeavor to put that to you when I can, Advocate Maluleke. But could I also just on the question of the council, ask why it took so long to, well, it's obviously still in process, but from the summit in 2018, nearly 4 years now, I believe. Do you think that this process has taken too long, or what has been behind the length of this legislative process?
In order to fast-track the National Council, there was a cabinet decision that said we must establish the council in the same format as SANEC, because it was established through a trust. It doesn't take long. However, in the process of doing that, civil society came and said, no, we do not want that process. We want legislation to be drafted. So then we had to abandon that process and start legislation. And I think you know that in South Africa, legislation takes longer to develop. And we fast-tracked as a department. We are proud to say we have fast-tracked the legislation, because we started drafting it, I think, somewhere end 2021. And 2023, it was now in Parliament, and NCOP will support it soon, and it will be out. So as far as I'm concerned, it didn't take too long to draft the legislation, but what took long was the processes before the drafting of the legislation.
And of course, it's difficult to predict what happens with legislation, and of course it's not necessarily in your hands what Parliament does, but do you have a date by when you'd like that council to be up and running?
Yes, next year it's supposed to be up and running, but also depending on the finances, because you still have to get a budget that will make it to function. So we have to develop the regulations and then establish it, and then we'll then have to get the budgets for it to be able to run. But maybe, Sizwe, let me just give me an opportunity
by
now.
All means,
This is the question I would like to offer. I think the biggest challenge is everybody is asking, or everybody has their own opinion in terms of what the council is going to do. Some of the people think the council is going to monitor government, whatever. The council is going to work with the community, civil society, and everyone. More than anything, the council will also focus on prevention. Sizwe, I think we can agree that we have a challenge of the collapse of the family in our society. Those are some of the challenges that we have, where you find that we have substance abuse and all those things. How does the council work with families in order to restore that? You might be coming from a good family, and I know, I'm just saying, but it's not everyone who's as fortunate as yourself and myself. So the council will also have to work with communities to ensure that the families take that responsibility, and the families are assisted to take that responsibility, to ensure that they raise their children. I'm not saying families are not raising their children now, they are raising their children, but how do you raise a boy or a young man who, when the girlfriend says, I no longer want you, and the boy says, or the boyfriend says, that's your loss, you can't do better than me, rather than take up a gun and want to kill the girl. Or even raise a girl who, when the boy says, I don't want you, the girl doesn't maybe hang herself, but say it's your loss. So I'm just saying, those are some of the conversations. I don't have all the answers. You also have to come in, you have to make inputs into that, so that all of us as a community, we dialogue, we converse and address the problem that we have, because the problem is bigger than just one department or even government. It's the whole society problem, and therefore we're going to take the whole society approach to address this problem.
Absolutely, and I couldn't agree more with you on the need for us to, as an entire society, confront this question, continue to talk about it, and prioritize it. Advocate Maluleke, could I just put some of our social media comments to you as our conversation comes to a close? We have Elijah, who says, we have been creating hashtags condemning men, but none of us have taken a time and say, let's speak to men and create an environment for them to vent out. SAPS, when a man reports abuse, he is turned to a laughingstock and called weak. Men are going through a lot. I know that the minister has spoken a lot about masculinity and the question of masculinity, because of course, many of the perpetrators of these crises are men. What are your thoughts on that leg of the question and the street?
See, most of the people think we say men don't experience abuse. There are men who experience abuse, but most of the time we focus on women because they're in the majority. But also, the Domestic Violence Act doesn't talk about a woman, it talks about a victim and a perpetrator. So a victim could be a female victim, could be a male victim, and the perpetrator could be a male perpetrator, it could be a female perpetrator. The police, there's a police national instruction where if the policeman can send back a victim, a male victim who's subjected to gender-based violence, if they send them back or they laugh at them, they need to report them, because we do acknowledge that also men can be victims. And I know that now lately there are many men's organizations, like even today where the president was speaking at the AU men's conference, there were many males organizations that participated, because they're trying to provide that platform for men also to be able to talk together, to influence, each other, to be a positive role model to our children and all those. So I understand what this person is saying. And
right.
If they want to report the matter, they can communicate with us. We'll assist them to report the matter. The police can send them back.
Advocate Maluleke, thank you so much for joining us on Unfiltered. We really appreciate your time.
Thank you.
We'll be back after this break. We face a crisis of femicide, of sexual crime, of domestic abuse. And as the 16 days of activism of no violence against women and children kicks off, we put these crises that our society faces in the spotlight. After this, we speak to a panel of experts on what's going wrong and how we can fix it. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back to Unfiltered. This evening, we place in the spotlight the question of gender-based violence as we embark on the 16 days of no violence against women and children. We've just come from a conversation with the Director General of the Department of Women, Children and Persons with Disability, and now we move on to a panel discussion with two experts working in this field, Advocate Brenda Madumise, as well as Sia Jendile, both of whom work in the legal space and also in the space of activism around questions of gender-based violence. Advocate Madumise, could I come to you first? And before the segment, we were speaking with Director General, who of course spoke about a whole of society approach. But at the end of the day, the criminal justice system really is central to how we confront the scourges of femicide and sexual crime and domestic abuse. What is your assessment of how South Africa's criminal justice system is confronting this question, and what do you think are the key challenges that we face?
Well, good evening, Susan, to my fellow panelists and to your viewers. Listen, I think you spot on when you refer to the criminal justice system, because that criminal justice system is founded on adversarial legal system. So the adversarial nature of it requires that you, the survivor and victim of sexual violence, of domestic violence, you rely on the state to fight your case, right? And you're hoping that the state is going to do its best to ensure that you get justice, right? But however, we have a system that has not been able to give confidence to victims and survivors of gendered violence. None at all, because it starts at the police station. And I've always said that your case turns on how you are treated at the police station, right? By the time that docket is given and transferred to the National Prosecuting Authority or the prosecutor, whoever that prosecutor is, it's going to define whether you are going to be successful or not be successful with your case. So when the state acts on your behalf, you become a bystander in your own case. You're watching people act on your behalf, and in fact, the sad thing with this country is that you interact with your prosecutor on the day that the matter is before court. That prosecutor never had any engagement with you. And this is the reality of many victims and survivors of gendered violence in this country, that on the day that matter is on the roll, that's the only time that the prosecutor you meet the prosecutor. And by the way, the prosecutor has got 20, 30 other files, and that's the first postponement that's going to happen because he has not applied his mind to your case, right? And that's why you have these matters running as long as they do, because there's no dedication and on the time and diligence given to these cases. So that criminal justice system is our Achilles heel, and something must give.
Indeed, and Mr. Gentile, thank you for joining us as well. In terms of Not In My Name International, what's your thought on the role of the criminal justice system in this question of gender-based violence?
Thank you so much, Caesar. Good evening to you and to Advocate Brenda as a colleague in the space.
Evening.
Evening, sorry. Hey. We you know, when you're doing this the whole day, but I agree with almost everything that she said, and this has been the frustration for us as grassroots activists. You know, the criminal justice system, we believe that it still needs to be strengthened. There's a lot of loopholes, and as a result, it is the victims who end up, you know, being subjected to secondary victimization. And so we really need to, you know, start looking very closely and try to find ways on which we can close some of those gaps and some of those loopholes. And I'm happy that something is definitely being done, albeit at the pace that we are not comfortable with, which is very slow. But we've seen some movement in terms of some legislative measures and policy framework measures from the side of government as well. And we have seen some work being done by grassroots activists such as ourselves in ensuring that we put pressure on the criminal justice system to act on some of these cases.
Absolutely. And in terms of the legislative changes that have been proposed, we heard from the Director General about the three main amendment acts. Advocate Madumisa, to what extent do you think those amendments that I think came through in 2021 have had a positive impact on the criminal justice system's ability to deal with the scourge of gender-based violence and femicide?
Of the three, I think what is going on at the moment is, and which is what we need to do once we pass laws in this country, is to do a cost analysis of what these laws are going to cost us, right? From a human perspective and financial perspective. So that you don't have a law that goes in, is promulgated, and it must be implemented, but there are no resources towards it, right? And these three are quite extensive in how they should be rolled out. So if you look at the Domestic Violence Act, for instance, there are the amendments there too, and which is an exercise that we did ourselves. Remember, it now encourages victims of domestic violence to apply for protection order online.
Right.
Here's what the problem is. You can apply online, Caesar, right? But you're still expected to print out the forms and take to the police, to the court, for them to issue with an interim order. So we online is just online. Because it's not an online process, and maybe that's our problem. We thought online as an entire process that gets started and completed with you online, and you'll get a response to your protection order application, and you'll be issued with an interim order for you to come back for a final one. However, we have a protection order that you apply for online, and we thought this was one of the major changes to all of this. You still have to print, and you still have to incur cost of printing and incur cost of you getting into a car or taxi to go to the nearest court for that interim protection order to be issued. The second one really that is a positive is around the application for bail. It was a given that in these cases, prosecutor will not even oppose bail. The new amendments makes it mandatory for prosecutors to oppose bail on all gender violence cases, right? So that's a good positive, and we're hoping to see that practice. And I must say, I've seen that prosecutors are putting up a fight for the first time, so that perpetrators understand that there is seriousness that is being applied to all these cases. The third one is around the National Sex Offenders Register, right? Which now we have extended its scope, right? It used to only cover children and people who are living with disability. Now it's open for anyone who is convicted of a sexual offense, and their names must be put on the register. And in fact, Sizwe, there's a case that happened a month or two ago where the judge, in giving out his judgment, even ordered that the name of that individual should be put on the register. So we are beginning to see the judiciary acting on these amendments and really applying their minds on these amendments. There's a lot with those amendments that still has to trickle down and give confidence to the populace. But there's things happening, and we need to ensure that we don't take our the pedal and ensure compliance.
Indeed. And let me come to Mr. Gentile, because that's a really interesting survey of the amendments that have been made, and it's actually encouraging to hear that even though the progress is painstakingly slow, we are seeing changes in the criminal justice system. What's your thought on those laws and the extent to which they have aided in the confrontation of gender-based violence and femicide? And have you seen anything on the ground in your activism which suggests the impact of the laws? Sure.
So laws, legislation, policy, it's always well and good on paper. As Advocate was saying, we are still to see action practically, physically on the ground. And for me, the most important thing has been, I do agree with some of the interventions that are there that are victim-centered, the interventions that ensure that we give maximum support to victims or survivors of gender-based violence. However, I've always been of the view that we need to go a step further and try to deal with the root cause of the problem, which is these toxic masculinities. And I'm happy that we've had high-level dialogues within the past 2 days. The AU convened a conference on positive masculinities in leadership. Sure. And so I think that is where it really needs to start. Most of violence cases against women and children happen in the homes where no legislation has got room to maneuver at that time when the incidents are happening. And so we need to start actively finding new ways of resocializing men and boys better, finding new ways to rehabilitate those who may be rehabilitated amongst us. Those who cannot be rehabilitated, then the criminal justice system, that's where it needs to come in very strongly. And so as part of redefining these masculinities, I'm of the view that we need now to encourage all men to take this collective responsibility against GBV and be positive role models. Also with an understanding that masculinities are dynamic, they're not static, they change all the time. There's different forms and shapes of masculinities. There's hegemonic masculinities, there's masculinities that are subordinate, others are this and that. And so we need to understand them within a context within which they exist. And so our interventions, it's okay for them to be victim-centered, to be victim support-centered. However, we really need to start putting more effort towards ensuring rehabilitation, resocialization of men and boys, because otherwise everything that is legislative that we are doing is otherwise reactionary other than preventative.
Indeed, and can we just stay on that question of masculinity and how it figures into this wider question? What kind of interventions in terms of resocialization, for example, do you think can be effective in resocializing men, boys, around the way in which violence has become so endemic in many cultures, cross-cutting race background in our country. What can be done on that side of the equation?
Dialogue. Dialogue is a very powerful tool. Often men feel unheard. They feel that no one is listening to their side of the story. That is why, even as the president was speaking today, I was following some of the engagements on his Twitter page. He was saying, "What about men? What about men?" You know, and so the one thing that South African men need, or African men more than anything, is someone to listen to, and that listening, that's why now we are presented with an opportunity to change mindsets, to change, because if no one challenges you on a thought and a belief that you hold, you will then believe that you've got the correct thought, and what the patriarchy, what is it successfully done is that it has continued to ensure that it teaches boys to be aggressive, but simultaneously it teaches girls to be submissive to the same aggression. And so our starting point should be dialogues. I need to be able to say to you, are you okay? You know, what are your issues as a man? And you need to be able to open up to me. And so if we can start there, we'll really say that, you know, we have started a very good, we've laid a very good foundation. So for me, dialogue is the number one most important start, and then you can talk about other things later, other programs later, but
Absolutely.
we need to start talking to men.
And we will do just that. We're in conversation this evening around the question of gender-based violence and femicide. We've spoken to the Director General of the Department of Women, Children and Persons with Disabilities, and we're now in conversation with an expert panel of activists and legal minds passing the problem of gender-based violence. And after the break, we go to some of the solutions. How can we move this crucial priority that is a stain on our nation forward? Stick with us, and we'll be back after the break. Welcome back to Unfiltered. I'm now joined by a panel of experts working in the space of gender-based violence and femicide and its eradication and confrontation. Sia Gendile, President of Not In My Name, and also Advocate Brenda Madumise. Advocate Madumise, could I come to you? You gave us a really fascinating view of all the different changes to the law and the problems confronting the criminal justice system. You have a very unique vantage point with your understanding of the law as well on this matter. Where do we go from here, and what do you think are the next steps in this journey towards confronting GBV and femicide? And what would you think our next priorities as a nation should be?
A couple of things that, for me, we need to look at. If you look at what we get up to as South Africans working in this space, you will ask your question, why is it that we have not made the dent on this crisis, on this scourge, right? Because we've got a plethora of organizations working. You've got government that is doing whatever it's supposed to do. You've got private sector. You've got academia. I mean, I'm sitting here in Clarence and attending a conference of 26 university in South Africa of people who are working in gender and diversity, inclusion and transformation, and are grappling with the same issues of how they make their university safe for students and everyone else interacting with the university. So what we have failed to do as a country for the longest of time is to coordinate all these efforts so that they give us the scale that we're looking for. Because at the moment, all of us feel like that we're not making the impact that we're supposed to make, precisely because we're working in silos and we're very fragmented, right? And in fact, one of the challenges that we face is that because the work has to be funded and you have donors who dictate what areas you should focus on, we are all over the show, and then we end up competing with one another and against each other, right? So for me, it's that coordination that must happen so that when we tackle it in the manner that we should tackle it, and in fact, we had made a submission to the Department of Women. I hope the DGs touch on it, that declare this as a disaster for the country, so that you mobilize resources and tackle from one place with all the requisite resources, and we fight it, right? Because it's complex and it's complicated, right? And it gets complex because we all trying to do different things without really looking at the structural drivers of gendered violence. And once we address the structural drivers and spend time, as Sia said, on preventative interventions and programs, we will then start to see the needle moving.
In terms of coordination, the Director General who we had on earlier said that that's really what the department is designed to do. And yet, Advocate Madumise says something which we have to reflect on, which is we've got the new 2018 strategy, we've got legal changes, we've got this new council coming up, we've got civil society, we've got academics talking about this. And yet, when we look at the data, whether we're talking femicide, whether we're talking sexual crime, whether we're talking domestic abuse, we're not actually moving the crisis and seeing demonstrable progress on stopping these crises. And that's something we need to sit with as a country, in terms of how so much effort has been galvanized around the question, and yet still we're not making a dent on the fundamental crises.
Yeah, I think that speaks to several factors, and one of them, Advocate mentioned the issue of working in silos. If your work is not coordinated, then it's difficult, one, to track if you are making any progress. It is difficult to tell what are areas of improvement. But just as a response to that, one of the things that was done, another program that we are part of, which is championed by the Deputy President, who happens to be the chairperson of SANAC, called Takwaneri Ime Men's Movement. We are trying to have an institution through these men's parliaments, where we have dialogues with men, whether at regional level, provincial level, right up until national level. And so those are some of the ways in which we can have structured response. But one of the things which I think are a problem, the most pressing issue, again, the Advocate mentioned the issue of mobilizing resources. The work that we do is demanding. It takes a lot from you as an individual and from your family, and it takes, it takes everything, such that you get compassion fatigue. Just from hearing the stories of people who have been affected by violence. And so because there are no resources, and there is somehow not even a political will to ensure that organizations that are working on the ground, supplementing the work of government, are actually supported. And so that discourages a lot of organizations, hence now the competition that the Advocate was referring to. So if I get 10 rand to implement a program, even if I know that I don't have the capacity to implement a boys program or a victim empowerment program, and CISO's organization has, but because I know that chances are that I'm going to go the next 3.5 years without any cent coming into the organization's account, let me rather keep to this funds and do work which will not be effective because I'm not adequately equipped and trained to do that work. So there are a number of challenges really that we are facing in this space, but again, nothing dialogue cannot face. What we should be doing, and the DG said that is the responsibility or the role of their department. Perhaps they need to reach out to more organizations and find ways of maximizing appetite, because I'll tell you now, there is I don't know if I should say it's a communication breakdown between the department and organizations on the ground, or what is it really? But yes, there's something is not right there, and I don't want to go deeper into that. But they really need to. Please do. They really need to reflect on the way in which they communicate with organizations. But we appreciate the work that has been done. We appreciate, in fact, even how they came out to facilitate this particular conference. I know that they played a crucial role, and we really need to give kudos to them about that. But Susan, I just want to add maybe one or two things which I think, maybe you'll want to discuss those later, but I really think that our education system needs to be reviewed, and we need to have gender sensitivity training in high school level. We need to teach boys and girls about gender-based violence from high school. I'm not sure how far the life orientation curriculum extends, but we need to have that, and it needs to move as far as first year, and it must be mandatory. And then it also needs to move to places of work. We need gender sensitivity training in corporates, and we're extending a hand of partnership. They must reach out to people who've got capacity. The advocates are here. They must be capacitated to deal with these things.
Right. Let's leave it there and bring Advocate Madumise on there, because there's a lot that comes out of what you've said. Advocate Madumise, on the one hand, there's this question of resources and the lack of resources, particularly where, quite frankly, many organizations and people are stepping into the role that government, quite frankly, often occupies. And this lack of coordination. How do you feel the department is discharging its coordination function, and the question of resources? And then we will come to the education question after that.
Listen, I think the department has to be very honest with itself and be frank. It's a department that is under-resourced itself, right? When we agreed that there's going to be a Ministry of Women, it was like a dumping ground. We're going to just put people there, and we don't have a budget to it. I mean, that budget, if you look at it, is not even more than 200 million, and 40% of that goes to CGE, by the way. So the money that keeps CGE going comes from the budget of Department of Women. So that's a problem in itself, how that ministry is located and how it's funded, right? That's why they'll continue to, remember now they've added disability, they've also added youth and children. And they must cover all that area, right? I'm not sure whether the budget that was sitting with youth disability from DSD, did it move to the Department of Women, Youth and People Living with Disability? But the reality is that that department is not adequately resourced. The second thing is that I saw Sia trying to be nice. You can't be nice with the department. We need to be, if we want to fix this country, we need to be honest and tell the truth. They want to choose who they want to work with, right? And going towards election now, they will choose NGOs that are ANC aligned, right? We need to be honest with all those things. When you don't want to work with other organizations because maybe they make too much noise, maybe Advocate Madumise is a problem, so we don't want to work with her. And we get to know that these things are said in meetings, right? Because she's going to say things that make everyone uncomfortable. If we adopt that attitude, we are not going to win at this war. So the department itself, really, we need to ask ourselves if this department is resourced to the point where it can execute on what it's meant to execute. I'll give an example quickly. We wrote to the DG herself when we had a conference, a summit again in November last year.
Yes.
The second summit on gender-based violence and femicide, right? No one has asked the department where the report, the conference report is. It's another year later, we still don't have a report on that conference. We still don't have the resolutions that we as NGOs said they must be fast-tracked, right? Fast-track these ones, right? Council being one of them, right? And many others. Please fast-track these resolutions. They will take us somewhere. Still no response. We wrote the DG a letter. Did she respond to us? No. So I don't have the time and the niceness around this issue, because We play games with people's lives, and we come into these platforms offered to us, and we come and posture and play to the gallery. I'm sorry, I'm not doing that anymore.
Mr. Gentile, of course, there's some really important issues raised there. I'm going to sadly have to say that we're going to have to end on your response here tonight in the 2 minutes or so that we have left. But if there's anything that emerges from what Advocate Madumisa says that you'd like to respond to, and any concluding thoughts?
No, I think Advocate has said a mouthful, and I agree, by the way, with everything that she has been saying. Our sector is marred by its own controversies, by its own politics, and she raised a very important point of alignment. As an NGO, you need to be somewhat aligned to certain political parties in order for you to get, the recognition or the assistance that you deserve as a South African organization working in South Africa. And so those are some of the things that are pulling us backward. But for me, again, I'm more worried about what are some of the things that we can do in the immediate, and that reviewing that educational system, as well as continuing with making noise around strengthening the criminal justice system. And we've made a very serious call as well as an organization to say that offenders of sexual offenders against children must be labeled or categorized as capital crimes, and they should be punishable as such. And we have also made a call for chemical castration of child rapists as well. We know those may seem extreme, but that is where we are. Violence against women and children is very expensive. You would have seen the report at KPMG that 0.9 to 1.3 of the gross domestic product goes towards gender-based violence. You're talking between 28 billion and 48 billion. Those are some of the funds that could be used towards free education, funding employment initiatives. And so we really can no longer afford to be complacent. We cannot afford to massage perpetrators who refuse to be rehabilitated. But I'm making once more a call for us. Let us work together. Let us ensure that we don't get tired of fighting for what is right.
Absolutely. Mr. Gentile, Advocate Madumisa, thank you very much for the work that you do and for joining us on this panel this evening. Tonight we have prioritized the question of gender-based violence and femicide. Our country faces the scourge of femicide, the scourge of sexual crime, as well as the scourge of domestic abuse. And although much effort has been expended in confronting these scourges, the numbers continue to remain stubbornly high. How do we get to the bottom of this crisis, and how do we make real progress? That's what we've asked tonight. Let's continue this conversation at Unfiltered SABC on social media. Thank you for joining us for another episode, and have a good evening.